Welcome to our channel. Hollywood Movie Review. Shutter Island 2010 Movie Review. Shutter Island is a 2010 American neo-noir psychological thriller film 5 directed by Martin Scorsese. The screenplay was adapted by Elias Koteas from the 2003 novel by Dennis Lehane. It follows Deputy U.S. Marshal Edward Teddy Daniels and his partner Chuck, who come to the fictional Shutter Island in Boston Harbor to investigate its criminal psychiatric facility after one of its patients goes missing. Daniels has his own ulterior motives for taking the case. The film stars Leonardo DiCaprio and Mark Ruffalo, with Ben Kingsley, Max von Sydow and Michelle Williams in supporting roles. Development began when Phoenix Pictures acquired the film rights to the novel directly from Lehane after Columbia Pictures had allowed their rights to lapse in 2003. Phoenix hired Elias Koteas to work on a screenplay for a year, and in 2007, announced that both Scorsese and DiCaprio had joined the project. Production began on March 6, 2008, at various locations in Massachusetts. Filming ended on July 2, 2008. Partnering with Paramount Pictures, the film's wide release was on February 19, 2010, and received generally positive reviews from critics. It was ranked by the National Board of Review in their top 10 film of 2010, and grossed $295 million worldwide. The film is also noted for its soundtrack, which prominently featured classical music by composers such as Gustav Mahler, Christoph Penderecki, György Ligeti, John Cage, Ingram Marshall, and Max Richter. In 2025, the film was voted for the Reader's Choice edition of the New York Times list of the 100 best movies of the 21st century, finishing at number 169. In 1954, U.S. Marshal Edward Teddy Daniels and his new partner Chuck all travel to Ashecliffe Hospital for the criminally insane on Shutter Island in Boston Harbor. They are investigating the disappearance of Rachel Solando, a patient of the hospital who had killed her 3 children by drowning. The staff, led by psychiatrist Dr. John Cawley and his colleague Dr. Jeremiah Eyring, appear uncooperative. The marshals learn that Dr. Lester Sheehan, who was treating Solando, left the island on vacation immediately after Solando disappeared. Teddy experiences migraines and flashbacks of his time as a U.S. soldier in the liberation of Dachau, as well as vivid dreams of his wife Dolores, who was killed in a fire in their building set by pyromaniac Andrew Ladies. Teddy tells Chuck he took this case to find Ladies, whom he believes is a patient. Solando suddenly resurfaces, but believes Teddy is her husband. Teddy breaks into the restricted Ward C to find Ladies, but meets patient George Noyce, who acts as if he knows Teddy. Noyce says the doctors experiment on patients and lobotomize them in the lighthouse. He warns Teddy that everyone will deceive him and not to trust his partner Chuck. Teddy and Chuck climb the cliffs toward the lighthouse but are separated. Believing he saw Chuck's body on the rocks below, Teddy climbs down but finds a cave where a woman claiming to be the real Rachel Solando is hiding. She reveals she is a former psychiatrist who discovered clandestine experiments on mind control at the facility, and was forcibly committed to silence her. She warns that Cawley and Eyring will use Teddy's war trauma to feign a psychotic break, so they can have him committed. Teddy returns to the hospital. When he asks about Chuck, Cawley insists that Teddy arrived at Shutter Island alone. Convinced that Chuck has been taken to the lighthouse, Teddy is intercepted by Eyring, who attempts to sedate him. Teddy overpowers him and breaks into the lighthouse to find Cawley waiting for him. Cawley tells him that Rachel Solando never existed and that Teddy has not been drugged but is experiencing withdrawal from chlorpromazine, a neuroleptic medication he has taken for the past 2 years. Chuck arrives and reveals that he is Dr. Sheehan. Cawley reveals that Teddy is really Andrew Ladies, a former U.S. Marshal incarcerated at Ashecliffe for killing his manic-depressive wife Dolores Janal after she drowned their 3 children. Andrew failed to seek treatment for Dolores when she burned down their apartment. He instead moved his family to a lake house where Dolores carried out the killings. As a result of his guilt, Andrew became delusional and created the alternate persona of Edward Daniels. The investigation of Rachel Solando was an elaborate role-play, supported by hospital staff, to help Andrew play out his delusion so he might break out of it and return to reality. Overwhelmed, Andrew faints. Awakening, Andrew recounts the truth, satisfying the doctors that he is lucid. Cawley notes they had achieved this state 9 months ago but had quickly regressed. He warns that this will be Andrew's last chance, and if he lapses again, he will be lobotomized due to his violent conduct toward the guards and other patients, such as Noyce. Some time later, Andrew relaxes on the hospital grounds with Sheehan. Appearing delusional, he calls Sheehan Chuck, and says they must leave the island. Sheehan signals to a watching Cawley, who orders the lobotomy. Andrew asks Sheehan if it would be worse to live as a monster or to die as a good man. A stunned Sheehan calls Andrew Teddy, but the latter does not respond and leaves peacefully with the orderlies for his operation. The rights to Dennis Lehane's novel Shutter Island were first optioned to Columbia Pictures in 2003. Columbia did not act on the option, and it lapsed back to Lehane, who sold it to Phoenix Pictures. Phoenix hired Leyta Kalogridis, and together, they developed the film for a year. Director Martin Scorsese and actor Leonardo DiCaprio were both attracted to the project. Production began on March 6, 2008. Lehane's inspiration for the hospital and island setting was Long Island in Boston Harbor, which he had visited as a child with his uncle and family during the blizzard of 1978. Shutter Island was mainly filmed in Massachusetts, with Taunton being the location for the World War II flashback scenes. Old industrial buildings in Taunton's Whittenton Mills complex replicated the Dachau concentration camp. The old Medfield State Hospital in Medfield, Massachusetts, was another key location. Cawley's office scenes were the second floor of the chapel during the late evening. Lights were shown through the windows to make it appear to be daytime. The crew painted the hospital's brick walls to look like plywood. This served the dual purpose of acting as scenery and blocking the set from view of a local road. The crew wanted to film at the old Worcester State Hospital, but demolition of surrounding buildings made it impossible. The stone lodge next to Leech Pond at Borderlands State Park in Easton, Massachusetts, was used for the cabin scene. The film used Peddocks Island as a setting for the story's island. East Point, in Nahant, Massachusetts, was the location for the lighthouse scenes. The scenes in which Teddy and Chuck are caught in the hurricane were filmed at the Wilson Mountain Reservation in Dedham, Massachusetts. Filming ended on July 2, 2008. The film does not have an original score. Instead, Scorsese's longtime collaborator Robbie Robertson created an ensemble of previously recorded material to use in the film. Shutter Island, music from the motion picture, was released on February 2, 2010, by Rhino Records. According to a statement on Paramount's website, the collection of modern classical music on the soundtrack album was hand-selected by Robertson, who is proud of its scope and sound. This may be the most outrageous and beautiful soundtrack I've ever heard. Los Angeles Times classical music reviewer Mark Swed noted that Robertson went through a lot of trouble to make things work as well. He argues that while other reviewers have called the music melodramatic, nothing could be further from the truth. Another reviewer noted that Scorsese has abandoned his oft-used classic rock soundtrack habits and, almost positively taking a cue from Stanley Kubrick's soundtracks, adopted a selection mostly of various modern classical pieces, 18, and that this set of pieces certainly suggests a different mood rather than a conventional score. Pop culture critic Noel Murray lists the album at number 24 in Vulture's 2018 40 Greatest Movie Soundtracks of All Time, saying, "Besides drawing attention to the modern geniuses of a wholly different genre, the unfamiliar, almost alien sounds of the Shutter Island soundtrack reinforce the movie's tale of hallucinatory madness." A full track listing of the album is below. All the musical works are featured in the final film. Shutter Island is a period piece with nods to different films in the film noir and horror genres, paying particular homage to Alfred Hitchcock's works. Scorsese stated in an interview that the main reference to Teddy Daniels was Dana Andrews' character in Laura, and he was also influenced by several very low-budget 1940s zombie movies by Val Lewton. The main plot resembles William Peter Blatty's The Ninth Configuration as well as The Cabinet of Dr. Caligari. Lockroy noted Shutter Island was a complex and puzzling work that borrowed from genres as diverse as detective, fantasy, and the psychological thriller. There have been differing opinions of the film's ending, in which Ladies asks Dr. Sheehan which would be worse, to live as a monster, or to die as a good man, a line that does not appear in the book. Professor James Gilligan of New York University was Scorsese's psychiatric advisor, and he said that Ladies' last words mean, "I feel too guilty to go on living. I'm not going to actually commit suicide, but I'm going to vicariously commit suicide by handing myself over to these people who are going to lobotomize me." Dennis Lehane, however, said, "Personally, I think he has a momentary flash. It's just one moment of sanity mixed in the midst of all the other delusions." The film was originally scheduled to be released by Paramount Pictures in the United States and Canada on October 2, 2009. Paramount announced it was pushing back the release date to February 19, 2010. Reports attribute the pushback to Paramount not having the financing in 2009 to spend the $50 to $60 million necessary to market a big awards pick like this, to DiCaprio's unavailability to promote the film internationally, and to Paramount's hope the economy might rebound enough by February 2010 that a film geared toward adult audiences would be more viable financially. The film premiered at the 60th Berlin International Film Festival as part of the competition screening on February 13, 2010. Spanish distributor Manga Films distributed the film in Spain after winning a bidding war that reportedly reached the $6 million to $8 million range. Rotten Tomatoes gives the film an approval rating of 69% based on 263 reviews, with an average rating of 6.7/10. The site's critical consensus reads, "It may not rank with Scorsese's best work, but Shutter Island's gleefully unapologetic genre thrills represent the director at his most unrestrained." On Metacritic, the film received a weighted average score of 63 out of 100, based on 37 critics, indicating generally favorable reviews. Audiences surveyed by CinemaScore gave the film an average C+ grade on a scale of A+ to F. Lawrence Topman of the Charlotte Observer gave the film 4 stars out of 4, claiming, "After 4 decades, Martin Scorsese has earned the right to deliver a simple treatment of a simple theme with flair." Writing for the Wall Street Journal, John Anderson highly praised the film, suggesting it requires multiple viewings to be fully realized as a work of art. "Its process is more important than its story, its structure more important than the almost perfunctory plot twists it perpetrates. It's a thriller, a crime story and a tortured psychological parable about collective guilt." Awarding the film 3.5 stars out of 4, Roger Ebert of the Chicago Sun-Times wrote, "The movie is about atmosphere, ominous portents, the erosion of Teddy's confidence and even his identity. It's all done with flawless directorial command. Scorsese has fear to evoke, and he does it with many notes." The Orlando Sentinel's Roger Moore, who gave the film 2.5 stars out of 4, wrote, "It's not bad, but as Scorsese, America's greatest living filmmaker and film history buff should know, even Hitchcock came up short on occasion. See for yourself." Dana Stevens of Slate described the film an aesthetically and at times intellectually exciting puzzle, but it's never emotionally involving. The Washington Post film critic and Hornaday negatively described the film as being weird. A.O. Scott of the New York Times wrote, "Something terrible is afoot." Sadly, that something turns out to be the movie itself. In 2025, it was on the Reader's Choice edition of the New York Times list of the 100 best movies of the 21st century, finishing at number 169. Keith Ulick of Time Out, New York, named Shutter Island the 5th best film of 2010. Shutter Island was released with The Ghost Rider, and, earning $41 million in its first weekend, finished first at the box office and gave Scorsese his highest grossing box office opening to date. The film remained at number 1 in its second weekend, with $22.2 million. Eventually, it grossed worldwide $294,805,697 and became Scorsese's second highest grossing film worldwide. It is Scorsese's fifth movie to debut at the box office at number 1, following Taxi Driver, Goodfellas, Cape Fear, and The Departed. Shutter Island was released on DVD and Blu-ray on June 8, 2010, in the US and on August 2, 2010, in the UK. The UK release features two editions, a standard edition and a limited steel case edition. For the 10th anniversary of the film's release, Paramount Pictures released a 4K steelbook and Blu-ray version on February 11, 2020. A Shutter Island video game was released for PC in 2010. A Nintendo DS version was cancelled. In August 2014, Paramount Television and HBO were reported to be developing a prequel TV series. Ashecliffe, Teddy, and Chuck, two U.S. Marshals, are sent to an asylum on a remote island in order to investigate the disappearance of a patient, where Teddy uncovers a shocking truth about the place. This movie was quite a big hit at the box office when it was released and it got solid reviews, but it rarely gets mentioned when people talk about Scorsese's work, which is a shame as it's one of his better movies and certainly one of his most engaging. Some called this film psychological horror, some called it neo-noir while others would categorize it as a detective mystery. As for myself, I would firmly put it in the psychological thriller category as the movie isn't really scary, but more thrilling and concerned with the protagonist's psyche. But yes, the noirish atmosphere and Hitchcock influences are evident, making for a classical feeling movie that pays homage to Hollywood's past while still feeling fresh and modern. This is one of those films where the opening and the ending take the cake as the most memorable parts while the middle section is somewhat forgettable. The beginning instantly hooked me in. As they arrived to this spooky place and the menacing score was following them, I was quite intrigued. I was so riveted, in fact, that I found the rest of the film pale in comparison. The movie lost a bit of its engagement later down the line as it became repetitious and it was in serious need of more thrills and memorable plot points. But then Scorsese capped the story with a twist ending that wasn't just unforgettable, but also genuinely fantastic and thoroughly believable. It made sense within the context of the story and particularly because we had enough hints about the protagonist's damaged psyche before this scene. The script is undoubtedly phenomenal and effective at capturing our fears of mental asylums and going crazy ourselves. I just wished that it had more to say about psychology as this is most definitely more a pulpy than serious genre film for better and for worse. Leonardo DiCaprio was well cast in the role that seemed somewhat similar to his aviator turn. He was excellent in both the damaged and the seemingly normal modes that he got to play. Mark Ruffalo was very good in a smaller, but important role. Others all got fleeting roles, but Ben Kingsley stole the movie as the suitably sinister psychiatrist working at this hospital. His scenes were among the most effective in the film. Shutter Island is a technical achievement. The cinematography by Robert Richardson is just fantastic, with the longer takes and crane shots being particularly impressive. The production design is fabulous, the attention to detail mesmerizing, and the film's dreary palette fit the subject at hand deftly. It's a very cinematic movie that is also very well directed and wonderfully scored. I just wished for a somewhat brisker pace and more twists and turns as this type of movie really needed more energy in its execution. The flashbacks were also too overwhelming. I walked into Shutter Island with incredibly high expectations. Considering it's a Martin Scorsese film, I expected nothing short of a masterpiece, especially since it reunites him with current go-to guy Leonardo DiCaprio. Add to that the fact that this is another Dennis Lehane adaptation, whose work was previously the basis of Mystic River, and Gone Baby Gone, and you've got the formula for a film that can't miss, right? Sure enough, Shutter Island is a good film. It's well acted, beautifully shot and full of atmosphere. Some have said that this is Scorsese's The Shining, and yes, this film is full of references to Kubrick's classic from the remote, chilling locations, to the music. It's also strongly reminiscent of a series of Val Lewton thrillers from the 40s, that Scorsese previously had issued on DVD, particularly the films Bedlam and Isle of the Dead. Still, I can't say that this is top-tier Scorsese for me. For some reason, I had trouble getting into Shutter Island. It just felt a little old hat, which is the last thing I'd expect from Scorsese. The last time he dabbled in horror, he came out with the incredible Cape Fear remake, which stands as one of the few remakes that trumps the original in my book. Here, the film just never really takes off. I didn't find it scary, and at times my mind began to wander somewhat. That said, I really can't pinpoint what's wrong with it. DiCaprio is great as Marshall Teddy Daniels. This is a fascinating, deeply layered character, with Daniels harboring many ulterior motives for his visit to Shutter Island, least of which is the investigation to which he's been assigned. He's haunted by the recent death of his wife Dolores, Michelle Williams, who he sees in nightmarish visions once he gets to the island. He's also dealing with the fact that he was present at the liberation of the Dachau death camp in WW2, which he's constantly reminded of in his nightmares. The Dachau flashbacks are brilliantly filmed, and truly disturbing. I think if Kubrick had lived to direct his planned Holocaust film, The Aryan Papers, it would have been similar to the way Scorsese shoots the sequences, and I still hope he finds time to make a WW2 film at some point. As his partner, Ruffalo is quite good, although the character initially comes off as a tad bland, until we find out more about his own reasons for being on Shutter Island. Playing the psychiatrists in charge of Asheklev, we get two old pros, Max von Sydow, and Ben Kingsley. Sydow's the more enigmatic, sinister-seeming doctor, and the former exorcist is great. Kingsley's terrific as the more compassionate doctor, and it's nice to finally see him in a film worthy of his talents, as he's been in way too much crap lately. Visually, Shutter Island is a feast, with Scorsese once again teaming up with Robert Richardson, and the look of the film is reminiscent of their work on The Aviator. The film has the look of being shot with old 2-strip Technicolor, which is appropriate considering the period setting. I also love the music score, which is all source material from artists like Brian Eno, John Cage, and Ingram Marshall. This shouldn't be too much of a surprise though, as when has the music in a Scorsese film been anything less than exquisite? It helps that once again he's working with his old pal, Robbie Robertson, as music supervisor. My problems with Shutter Island mostly deal with the last third of the film, which feels somewhat anticlimactic considering the build-up we've been getting. I was also somewhat underwhelmed by the mind ending, which is predictable in its unpredictability if that makes any sense. However, the final scene is indeed haunting. In the end, Shutter Island is a film that I think I need some time to absorb. While it's certainly not among his best, it's still a Scorsese film, so you get a level of quality here that you won't get elsewhere. I also have the feeling that this is the type of film that might benefit from repeat viewings, so I'll be anxious to give this another look somewhere down the line. Sure, it's not a masterpiece, but it's Scorsese, and it demands to be seen. Martin Scorsese should be very proud. His latest film, Shutter Island, is the best psychological thriller or 1995. That's not a typo, and this isn't necessarily a negative review. The movie, while at times creepy, well acted, and fun to watch, feels like it came out 15 years too late. In the post-Usual Suspects, post-Sixth Sense age, a great twist ending has to be spectacular, and not something that is all but given away in the trailer. I prayed going into this movie that I would be wrong, and that Scorsese had only pretended to telegraph Shutter Island's big mystery in the previews. Sadly, I could have guessed, in fact, did, all of the movie's secrets before the title card appeared on screen, but maybe I'm suffering from a case of having seen too many movies. I get that a lot. I've recently begun asking those who say that to me whether or not they would ever accuse someone of having read too many books. Digression aside, I'd like for you to play a game with me. Please read the synopsis below and see if you can figure out the big Shutter Island surprise. The year is 1954. Leonardo DiCaprio plays Teddy Daniels, a federal marshal from Boston who's called out to a remote mental asylum to investigate the disappearance of a patient. A former soldier who helped liberate Dachau, Teddy has constant flashbacks to the war. He also hallucinates a great deal, seeing visions of his wife, Dolores, Michelle Williams, who burned to death in an apartment fire a few years earlier. He also has a new partner on the assignment, named Chuck, Mark Ruffalo, whose main job is to take notes and eye Teddy suspiciously. The two men interview the staff and the head of the hospital, Dr. Colley, Ben Kingsley, who has, thankfully, taken up acting again, but no one will say anything about the missing patient or the mysterious note she left, which alludes to there being one more patient on the island than has been officially recorded. If you're like me, what's going through your mind right now is similar to what I thought after having watched this premise be established in the trailer. No way. There has to be more to it than that, right? I mean, they've just told me that Teddy is a patient at the hospital having delusions of being a detective. Well, there's a little more to it than that, but the film's twisty story points are just nuances of the inevitable. So if you're looking for a brain bender, stay off this island. That's not to say there isn't a lot to recommend here. As I said before, the actors are almost uniformly top-notch. Because we're dealing with Martin Scorsese, we know the movie will be filled with great faces and better performances. DiCaprio fares better with his Boston accent than Mel Gibson in the recent Edge of Darkness, and his gradual unraveling is fun to behold, if a tad melodramatic in parts. Mark Ruffalo is great as Chuck. He injects this non-role with a quiet, everyman quality that balances DiCaprio's manic eyes and hands. But the best roles in Shutter Island are those of the supporting cast. Ted Levine, John Carroll Lynch, Patricia Clarkson, Emily Mortimer, and Robin Bartlett make this movie believable possible, even. They play the wardens and the nutcases. In a movie like this, truly unnerving characters can keep the madhouse from simply being a funhouse. The one exception in the cast is Michelle Williams, who plays her scenes as an off-her-meds Alice Cramden, by way of Cliff Clavin from Cheers. Seriously, she was better on Dawson's Creek. Shutter Island has a lot going for it visually, too, but, and this is the strange part, the movie is undermined by Scorsese's poor choice of visual technique. Teddy's visions and memories of the concentration camp are poetic short stories that we glimpse and piece together as the story progresses. These aren't typical movie flashbacks, they're kaleidoscopic nightmares filtered through regret and suppressed rage. However, they're undermined by Scorsese's puzzling overuse of green screen in just about every other scene. I still can't figure out what the director was going for. Even in scenes where two characters are talking against a nondescript wall, the edges around their shoulders and heads show the slight fuzziness of a mediocre composite job. While images of piled bodies and reanimating corpses are suitably chilling, I was most upset by the fact that most of Shutter Island looks like it was filmed in a parking lot. This problem almost ruins the film's atmosphere, but not nearly as much as the music does. The instrumentals of the opening 10 minutes build and build, climaxing in a hammer-in-the-face barrage of ominous noise as Teddy and Chuck walk through the gates of the asylum. This is the most egregious instance, but there are several other moments where the music oversells moments that would have been more effective with no accompaniment. Nearly every emotion and story beat in Shutter Island is spelled out before anything significant happens, and it's an insulting distraction. On a related note, it is quite funny that the big twist is literally spelled out for the audience on a whiteboard. Teddy comes unglued and bursts into Dr. Colley's office with a shotgun, convinced he's uncovered a huge government conspiracy. Colley reveals that Teddy is suffering from delusions brought on by severe mental trauma. I won't give those specifics away, and the proof is in a pair of names that are anagrams for two other names. I won't spoil those, either, but the surprise won't be too startling to anyone who thought, that character's got a weird name, I wonder if it'll mean anything later on. Shutter Island is ultimately a noble failure. It kept me going for a good chunk of the running time, about 45 minutes could have been excised from the middle, hopeful that my initial theory would be proven wrong. I'll never watch it again, and for me that's not the mark of a good film. I think it's a tremendous waste of talent, time, and money. Had Scorsese gone a step further and shown Teddy not to be crazy, to have been, in fact, the victim of the conspiracy instead of the fabricator of it, this movie may have been closer to something special. As it stands, the movie's greatest shocking twist is that there isn't one. It seems that Martin Scorsese's age doesn't hinder his ability to direct a film in the majesty he is known for. Exhibit A is Shutter Island, a very well-told thriller set on an island in the Boston Harbor. Shutter Island is a film that certainly demands attention to details from the audience, as all these details eventually lead towards a bigger and whole picture in the end, and the filmmakers have dedicated immense time to getting every detail right. It is a film that the closer you look, the more you understand and appreciate in both the sense of the story and in the actual physical craft of the film. Every performance is layered, every shot and every line is multilayered and full of nuance. Scorsese certainly lets the subtleties take over, and by the end they accumulate to actually become the film. The cinematography is very pretty, and Robert Richardson takes advantage of the film's interesting story and uses that to his advantage. He employs lighting in a way that enhances the story as you never really know what's going on, and again just makes the film all the more layered. On top of that, so many images are beautifully composed, adding to the film's visual splendor. Enhancing the visual beauty are the sets and wardrobe that fit the setting of the 1950s perfectly and effectively define the film's aesthetic. The sets feel grand when they need to be and claustrophobic when they need to, which lets the world feel real and nuanced. They also contribute to the overall color scheme, which is really memorable in this film and makes the film all the more memorable because of it. Now, regarding the plot of the film, it is certainly a plot that requires attention to detail, as I said earlier, and probably would need multiple viewings to be fully understood. It is very multilayered, but also I feel like that can sometimes be a hindrance to the film. Though the film does take multiple directions in the story and then hit a wall and takes another direction, that is not an issue, as that is basically the point of the journey. What can be a hindrance in my opinion is the story being so multilayered and complex that it is really difficult to understand in one viewing. Even if you do recap the events thoroughly, there will still be details that are missing. While that can make for an enjoyable rewatch, it doesn't feel all that satisfying upon the first viewing, and that the film insists itself upon a second viewing. That isn't necessarily a bad thing, but I think a film should be as powerful the first time as it is upon rewatch, and it feels like this film is specifically crafted to be a film that needs to be rewatched to be fully appreciated. I still really liked the film, but that was something that bugged me a bit, just because I didn't feel like I was as satisfied as I should have been given the quality of the film. Overall, a very engaging thriller that is so multilayered there can be things that are buried a bit too deep underneath. Visually stunning and beautifully crafted, it's a must-see for everyone because of the immense talent displayed on and off-screen. Shutter Island starts working on us with the first musical notes under the Paramount logo's mountain, even before the film starts. They're ominous and doomy. So is the film. This is Martin Scorsese's evocation of the delicious shuddering fear we feel when horror movies are about something and don't release all the tension with action scenes. In its own way, it's a haunted house movie, or make that a haunted castle or fortress. Shutter Island, we're told, is a remote and craggy island off Boston, where a Civil War-era fort has been adapted as a prison for the criminally insane. We approach it by boat through lowering skies, and the feeling is something like the approach to King Kong's Island, looming in gloom from the sea. It fills the visitor with dread. To this island travel U.S. Marshal Teddy Daniels, Leonardo DiCaprio, and his partner Chuck All, Mark Ruffalo. It's 1954, and they are assigned to investigate the disappearance of a child murderer, Emily Mortimer. There seems to be no way to leave the island alive. The disappearance of one prisoner might not require the presence of two marshals unfamiliar with the situation, but we never ask that question. Not after the ominous walls of the prison arise. Not after the visitors are shown into the office of the prison medical director, Dr. Colley, played by Ben Kingsley with that forbidding charm he has mastered. It's clear that Teddy has no idea what he's getting himself into. Teddy's such an innocuous name in such a gothic setting. Scorsese, working from a novel by Dennis Lehane, seems to be telling a simple enough story here: the woman is missing, and Teddy and Chuck will look for her. But the cold, grey walls clamp in on them, and the offices of Collie and his colleagues, furnished for the Civil War commanding officers, seem borrowed from a tale by Edgar Allan Poe. Scorsese the craftsman chips away at reality piece by piece. Flashbacks suggest Teddy's traumas in the decade since World War II. That war, its prologue and aftermath, supplied the dark undercurrent of classic film noir. The term post-traumatic shock syndrome was not then in use, but its symptoms could be seen in men attempting to look confident in their facades of unstyled suits, subdued ties, heavy smoking, and fedoras pulled low against the rain. DiCaprio and Ruffalo both affect this look, but DiCaprio makes it seem more like a hopeful disguise. The film's primary effect is on the senses. Everything is brought together into a disturbing foreshadow of dreadful secrets. How did this woman escape from a locked cell in a locked ward in the old fort, its walls thick enough to withstand cannon fire? Why do Collie and his sinister colleague Dr. Naering, Max von Sydow, ready to play chess with death, seem to be concealing something? Why is even such a pleasant person as the deputy warden not quite convincingly friendly? He's played by John Carroll Lynch, Marge's husband in Fargo, so you can sense how nice he should be. Why do the methods in the prison trigger flashbacks to Teddy's memories of helping to liberate a Nazi death camp? These kinds of questions are at the heart of film noir. The hero is always flawed. Scorsese showed his actors the great 1947 noir out of the past, whose very title is a noir theme. Characters never arrive at a story without baggage. They have unsettled issues, buried traumas. So, yes, perhaps Teddy isn't simply a clean-cut G-man. But why are the others so strange? Kingsley in particular exudes menace every time he smiles. There are thrilling visuals in Shutter Island. Another film Scorsese showed his cast was Hitchcock's Vertigo, and we sense echoes of its hero's fear of heights. There's the possibility that the escaped woman might be lurking in a cave on a cliff, or hiding in a lighthouse. Both involve hazardous terrain to negotiate, above vertiginous falls to waves pounding on the rocks below. A possible hurricane is approaching. Light leaks out of the sky. The wind sounds mournful. It is, as they say, a dark and stormy night. And that's what the movie is about: atmosphere, ominous portents, the erosion of Teddy's confidence and even his identity. It's all done with flawless directorial command. Scorsese has fear to evoke, and he does it with many notes. You may read reviews of Shutter Island complaining that the ending blindsides you. The uncertainty it causes prevents the film from feeling perfect on first viewing. I have a feeling it might improve on second. Some may believe it doesn't make sense. Or that, if it does, then the movie leading up to it doesn't. I ask myself, okay, then, how should it end? What would be more satisfactory? Why can't I be one of those critics who informs the director what he should have done instead? Oh, I've had moments like that. Every moviegoer does. But not with Shutter Island. This movie is all of a piece, even the parts that don't appear to fit. There is a human tendency to note carefully what goes before, and draw logical conclusions. But what if you can't nail down exactly what went before? What if there were things about Collie and his peculiar staff that were hidden? What if the movie lacks a reliable narrator? What if its point of view isn't omniscient but fragmented? Where can it all lead? What does it mean? We ask, and Teddy asks, too. After experimenting this way and that, I've realized that I can't really write any kind of analysis of Shutter Island that addresses exactly what makes it such an irritating, dispiriting, and above all unsatisfying experience, without making pretty damn free with the spoilers for the film's massive, easily guessed third act twist. So easily guessed, in fact, that there's something of a growing consensus that we're actually supposed to figure it out, but if this is enough to keep you from reading the whole thing, and you still want to know my capsule thoughts, they are, a visually handsome movie that lacks any stakes, emotional or intellectual, and Leonardo DiCaprio hasn't been this bad since at least Gangs of New York. Martin Scorsese is a better filmmaker than puzzle boxes. His best films are lusty and visceral, not because of their literal viscera but because of the pulsing urges which drive them. Think upon his last truly great work, Goodfellas, with all those heaving moments pushed by their rock soundtracks and breakneck camera work and off-the-wall editing into a state of exhausted cinematic bliss, or the raw presence and fleshy immediacy of Raging Bull, forever his reigning masterpiece. These are intense films, momentous films, films that strike you right in the glands. Nothing could be farther from this than Shutter Island, a film stuck deep inside its own head. A less generous reviewer might name a different part of the body, where it can only really function as an intellectual exercise. Either you're trying to figure out what's going on, or if you know what's going on, and you're trying to figure out what it means in terms of human sanity and the nature of moral behavior, or something along those lines. What's going on? The big twist ending of Shutter Island is so absurdly easy to guess that I don't half wonder if that's the whole point. It's a movie about an isolated psychiatric hospital. They can only have two possible twist endings, that the asylum has been taken over by the patients, or the other one. There seems to be absolutely no reason to assume that the very articulate, untwitchy people we see running the asylum are insane, so it pretty much has to be the other one. Of course, there could have been no twist at all, and wouldn't that have been a brave, bold statement to make, that this story of a federal marshal named Teddy Daniels, Leonardo DiCaprio, who travels to the remote Shutter Island in Boston Harbor in 1954 to help in the hunt for a missing patient is precisely what it looks like. Poof, you've got the setup for exactly the Lost in a Dark, creepy place movie that was promised by the absurdly misleading marketing campaign. Did you see the trailer? Did you love it? Did you look forward to seeing Scorsese return to psychological horror? Oops, because there is not a single goddamn thing about Shutter Island that comes within shouting distance of horror. Then, of course, this wouldn't be an adaptation of Dennis Lehane's 2003 novel, but that would be a small price to pay for making it a good film. I'm not trying to slam the book, which I haven't read. So yeah, Teddy is, of course, a patient at the asylum. He killed his wife and went nuts and created an elaborate alternative personality. I'm 95% positive that I was far from the only person who assumed all of that before I set foot in the theater. And knowing that information makes Shutter Island both a bit easier to take and a lot harder to take seriously. Mostly, it makes it easier to take in the first scene, which is otherwise a cinematic barbarism that would make you despair that Scorsese and a whole lot of extremely talented collaborators had all regressed to their first year at film school. The setting is a boat, where Teddy, besotted with motion sickness, and his brand new partner Chuck Mark Ruffalo, are traveling towards Shutter Island, which is otherwise inaccessible. Two things leap out during the sequence: some extremely lousy rear projection, and arguably the all-time worst continuity editing in any Scorsese movie ever. About the first of these in particular, it is worth noting that Scorsese has claimed a Hitchcock influence in making Shutter Island, and it's certainly not beyond belief that someone with his somewhat impish approach to movie making would use deliberately shoddy rear projection as part of an homage to Hitchcock. About the second, discontinuous editing has always been a trademark of Scorsese's films as cut by Thelma Schoonmaker, not I think because either of them craves discontinuity, but because it rather suits their purpose to privilege performance and visual rhythm over what is ultimately a fairly shallow concern. But even that doesn't really explain the awful cutting going on here, which is arrhythmic to the point of distraction, or even physical discomfort if you're a real editing fiend. But there is a but. Since the movie is about Teddy's mental break, cannot it be said that these seeming weaknesses are in fact our first clues to his fractured state? That the film is beginning its inquiry into psychological stability in these very first moments by breaking apart its own formal coherence. Sure, that can be said. But in that case, the distinct lack of any such particularly obvious stylistic quirks later in the movie, after this scene, the only time that I'd argue that any technical element of the movie can be said to represent insanity is the infrequent use of whip pans, is hard to explain, and I'm forced to wonder if I'm just trying to make excuses for Schoonmaker, who used to be my favorite editor of them all before she started gently getting worse with every film she cut after Gangs. There's a hell of a lot that Shutter Island tries to get away with using but he's insane. Card, crappy editing, some very peculiar logic leaps in the story and in the locations of some scenes, and arguably DiCaprio's performance, which manages the neat trick of being both stiff and broad at the same time. He also boasts a compellingly bad Boston accent that mostly disappears after the 10-minute mark, and so soon after doing such a fine job of it in The Departed, too. So conceited. Let us then take a look at his insanity, and what it does for the movie. I'm actually willing to spot the movie on some bits and pieces of elegant craftsmanship. It certainly looks sleek and almost impossibly atmospheric thanks to cinematographer Robert Richardson operating at his very peak. I should qualify that, he is not, as in The Aviator or Kill Bill, Volume 2, doing especially innovative things with the camera or film stock, but his control of lighting and composition are nearly divine here. Sandy Powell's costume designs are all at once perfect for evoking 1954, suggestive of character, and have a certain abstract quality that gives them an emotional charge. And Dante Ferretti's production design gives the whole thing an otherworldly, almost gothic feeling, that does probably more than any other element of the whole film to really legitimize the idea that we're watching a world filtered through a madman's eyes. I never consider it a sign of good things when I'm reduced to praising the costumes and sets, unless the film in question is an outright exercise in sheer style, which Shutter Island certainly isn't, but let's go ahead and say that we've got half of a successful movie here. It looks darn good. The other half, what the hell? The story, in brief, we follow a man for 2 hours, watching as his paranoia seems increasingly justified while he finds it harder and harder to deal with his post-World War II trauma. Then, in the last 20 minutes, we find out that the man we've been following never existed. If the film had been nothing more than a shabby little shocker, this would be just fine, if a bit shallow and trite. But it's never, ever shabby, nor very shocking. It's a psychodrama with some overlaid thriller elements. Scorsese may want this to be his Hitchcock film, but we spend most of it in Bergman country, what with the symbolic East dream sequences involving Dachau, the appropriation of Holocaust imagery is dubious, at least, or water and fire, and the otherwise pointless casting of Max von Sydow in what amounts to a cameo role. Everyone besides DiCaprio, Ruffalo, and Ben Kingsley as the asylum director has what amounts to a cameo role. That gives the film some unearned Scandinavian gravitas, anyway. Even Hitchcock's films are primarily psychodramas, they're just a bit more genre-driven than artsy. My point being, it's hard for a story to be a psychodrama when everything it tells us about the main character turns out to be a lie or a misdirection. It's a gotcha film, and if you can see the twist coming from a mile away, which I'm going to assume you could, especially if you're reading this before you see the movie, that makes for a lot of irritated waiting for the gotcha to hurry on its merry way and getch. There are, in essence, no stakes, there's absolutely no reason to give a damn about Teddy Daniels or what happens to him. A great performance might have overcome this, but DiCaprio is a dead fish, as is most of the cast. The smaller the role, the better the performance, in general, though only Patricia Clarkson, snarky and lively and wired, and Ted Levine, gaudily menacing, stand out in my memory, and the film generally lacks any human element worth talking about. I at least cannot even say what Shutter Island is about. I have encountered reviewers who have praised the film for its insights into the mind and how broken people cope or fail to cope, as they did not specify what they meant by this. I can't begin to imagine what they're talking about, so wholly does it fail to engage me in any way. Maybe it's not about anything more than Scorsese's well-established delight in finding coy ways to reference classic filmmakers. It has perhaps more quotations from more movies than any of his other films, but I really hope not. Still, I'll be switched if I can tell you what the film has to say about identity or personal morality, though it certainly seems to be something. I also can't tell you why it suffers from a soundtrack largely made up of avant-garde 20th century classical pieces applied with the subtlety of a jackhammer, but that is another issue. Leaving us with something not remotely as fun or playfully gauche as its genre trappings imply, and an experience a bit like eating a heavy meal and then being hungry again right away. Shutter Island is a film that usually gets tossed aside when discussing the greater movies of filmmaker Martin Scorsese. But since first seeing it in the theater during its original 2010 release, 3 times actually, I've stood firmly by my assertion that it's absolutely top-tier Scorsese. I loved everything about it then, and I've found that it still holds up to repeat viewings. The cast, the script, the costumes, the production design, and, of course, the direction are all top-notch. Adapted from the novel by Dennis Lehane, Shutter Island, at the time, marked the 4th collaboration between director Martin Scorsese and Oscar winner Leonardo DiCaprio. They would re-team in 2013's The Wolf of Wall Street, and their latest, Killers of the Flower Moon, is due out next year. Here Scorsese delves into the psychological thriller genre while also brilliantly injecting elements of horror and even classic noir. It all fits great with the cool period setting and the overall captivating premise. DiCaprio plays Federal Marshal Teddy Daniels, who is summoned to Ashecliffe Hospital on Shutter Island in Boston Harbor. It's a mental hospital for the criminally insane where a patient has recently gone missing. Teddy is accompanied by his new partner Chuck, Mark Ruffalo, to investigate the disappearance, but they're immediately met with a lack of cooperation. Teddy grows increasingly impatient, particularly with the facility's head psychiatrist, Dr. Colley, Ben Kingsley. To complicate matters, Teddy is being haunted by recurring dreams of his wife, Michelle Williams, who we learn died 2 years earlier. Scorsese is meticulous and deliberate in unfolding the many layers of the story, written by Leonardo DiCaprio, often focusing on misdirection more than a straightforward narrative. He sends us in several different directions but never gives us any firm footing until the end. And as usual for Scorsese, he never does anything without a purpose or reason. Whether it's metaphorical, revelatory, or a simple homage, his scenes are filmed with specificity and intent. If you fail to soak in the details, there's a good chance you may miss much of what he's going for. In a movie like this, the less you say about the story the better. But as the mystery uncoils, Scorsese reveals as much through his camera as through the script. The riveting cinematography, from Quentin Tarantino regular Robert Richardson, helps make the island one of the most effective supporting characters. Pedix Island in Boston Harbor was used for the haunting, panoramic shots of Shutter Island and was particularly effective in setting the tone in the chilling opening sequence. From there, the camera steadily works to immerse us deeper and deeper into the story's dark and unsettling setting. As for the performances, DiCaprio delivers what is one of my favorite performances of his to date. He's handed some challenging and emotionally heavy material, and he nails it. Ruffalo, Williams, and Kingsley along with Emily Mortimer, Patricia Clarkson, Jackie Earle Haley, and John Carroll Lynch make for a stellar supporting cast. We even get the late great Max von Sydow's small yet terrific role playing a creepy German doctor with a mysterious presence. Scorsese is known for surrounding himself with quality performers, and it's certainly no different here. Shutter Island was one of the best films of 2010, and it remains among my favorites from Martin Scorsese. It's impossible to restrict it to any one genre, it maintains a wonderfully eerie tone, and the direction and visual energy is sublime. Scorsese takes us on an emotional ride that can be hard to watch, especially as truths are slowly unearthed. The movie does require patience, but the payoff, both narratively and cinematically, makes every second of this extraordinary film worthwhile. Discussing movies with surprise twists at the end always makes me a little angry, especially when the twist has been described as nonsensical or sudden. In some cases, it speaks to just how little film audiences actually pay attention to the films they watch. Other times, plot twists are so obvious that the praise they receive just makes me shake my head. What's truly disappointing, however, is that any film like this tends to be known and evaluated based solely on the twist. Thea's Sixth Sense comes to mind. It has become less of a film and more of a contextless plot twist in the vacuum of film space. I fear that Shutter Island met a somewhat similar fate. So, as a complete film, does Shutter Island succeed, or is it just an obvious plot twist surrounded by a weak movie? Discussing movies with surprise twists at the end always makes me a little angry, especially when the twist has been described as nonsensical or sudden. In some cases, it speaks to just how little film audiences actually pay attention to the films they watch. Other times, plot twists are so obvious that the praise they receive just makes me shake my head. What's truly disappointing, however, is that any film like this tends to be known and evaluated based solely on the twist. The Sixth Sense comes to mind. It has become less of a film and more of a contextless plot twist in the vacuum of film space. I fear that Shutter Island met a somewhat similar fate. So, as a complete film, does Shutter Island succeed, or is it just an obvious plot twist surrounded by a weak movie? Shutter Island occasionally feels like a psychological horror film, especially when it focuses on the prison environment in which most of the scenes take place. The viewer joins Teddy Daniels, Leonardo DiCaprio, on his way to a prison island where a dangerous female patient has disappeared. However, his real reason for visiting the island is to find the man who killed his wife. Before long, he begins to find clues suggesting that he has been brought to the island for an entirely different reason, and he begins to doubt the doctors, his partner, and even himself. While it's not traditionally scary, Shutter Island is absolutely a film about both psychology and horror, focusing on how one can bring about the other and vice versa. While it does have a few frightening scenes, the implications of the themes explored, from lobotomy to mental degradation, are far more terrifying. If the viewer takes a moment to think about the real-world connections that the film makes, it's hard not to consider this a rather frightening film. It's also an atmospheric film that takes a series of beautiful locales and employs them for its own sinister needs. The opening scene contains nothing if not ominous cues. Its musical introduction, which sounds like a foghorn blowing over and over again, warns the viewer that Daniels has nothing to look forward to when he arrives at his destination. Even a stroll through thick woods becomes a torrent of danger and fear. As for the story itself, and, yes, including its ending twist, there's a level of attention paid to executing the story that allows a somewhat complex plot to avoid becoming a complete mess. Essentially, the story uses the perceived insanity of the patients to explain a lot of the strange behavior that would otherwise not make sense in light of the ending twist. For the most part, this technique succeeds. The actions of every character aren't always watertight, but none of them interferes with the overall understanding of the story. I still remember a time when I believed DiCaprio would never amount to more than his role in Titanic, that is, nothing. However, the character depicted by DiCaprio is rich and believable. Part of this is due to how he is written. Teddy Daniels's life has sucked quite a bit, but never does he seem whiny or pathetic. It's hard for an audience to avoid an emotional connection to him, which strengthens the film's conclusion. The story definitely isn't perfect, and some plot elements and characters don't necessarily add anything vital to the story that hasn't already been achieved. It's a long movie, and some of these sequences can make the film feel longer. However, when taken on the level of a continuous experience, it's hard to find major fault in any particular scene, as they never stall in their progress toward the film's eventual goal. I love psychological films, and Shutter Island is a fantastic entry in this genre. While it is indeed reliant upon a twist, the twist is more successful than the average "everything you believe is wrong" device. If you're a viewer that needs to rewatch any film with a twist to write each one of the plot holes in your little diary, you may rob yourself of the film's best qualities. As an exploration of psychology, mental degradation, and the horrors of real life, it is wholly worthwhile. From his earliest work onward, Martin Scorsese has always pondered the manner in which his characters contend with their guilt, personal tragedies, and sense of displacement. He's shown us a hoodlum who holds his hand over a candle's flame for a crude form of self-flagellation that soothes Christian guilt. He's peered into the impenetrable psyche of a loner cabbie, finding desires to both become a hero and lash out through violence. His characters have banged their heads against the wall as they curse themselves, they've gone out wandering late at night only to find that the night bites back, they've seen the ghosts of patients they could not save, and they've been nailed to a cross. From the pretext of a thrilling murder mystery, Shutter Island slowly develops into Scorsese's first venture into the genre of psychological horror, as the film's entire arrangement concerns the disturbing ways in which people manage their inner demons. Through maddened sociopaths and the scarred psyche of the story's hero, Scorsese underscores his long-existing exploration of our external responses to inner stimuli. Based on the novel by author Dennis Lehane, the script by Leonardo DiCaprio allows the director to delve into material that he has long contemplated, only here he's using a more potent visual language. In doing so, Scorsese pays homage to filmmakers that he's long admired by employing the gut-punch imagery of Samuel Fuller and the unrelenting suspense of Alfred Hitchcock. Seemingly a police procedural set on the dynamic stage of an insane asylum, the story progresses into the director's most virulent portrayal of a protagonist's environment serving as a manifestation of inner conflict. Much in the way that Travis Bickle succumbed to New York City in Taxi Driver or Howard Hughes lost himself to his germophobia in The Aviator, U.S. Marshal Ted Daniels, Leonardo DiCaprio, becomes influenced by the atmosphere of his surroundings both in body and mind. The setting is Shutter Island, an isolated rock in Boston Harbor that houses Ashcliffe, an asylum for the criminally insane. Teddy and his new partner, Chuck All, Mark Ruffalo, are sent there to investigate a missing inmate, a mother, Emily Mortimer, who murdered her children. Upon their arrival, both men find the scenery menacing and the hospital's staff peculiar. There's a strange mannerism about everyone they speak to, as if they're all privy to the same frightful secret that no one will speak of. But just as the doctors seem to be harboring this mystery, so too are the prisoners. Teddy and Chuck conduct interviews with doctors and patients, and their sense that something is wrong within Ashcliffe grows with every encounter. Take the hospital's creepy and elusive administrator, Dr. Cawley, Ben Kingsley, who always seems to circumvent Teddy's probing. Another of the staff, Dr. Naehring, Max von Sydow, is more direct in his ability to outwit and therefore provoke Teddy. Outside the hospital's walls, an immense storm builds and promises to trap the marshals there for some time. Meanwhile, the situation and conditions force Teddy to recall tragic events from his past, his time as a soldier at the liberation of Dachau, and the death of his wife, Michelle Williams, at the hands of an arsonist. Represented through surreal dream imagery, these flashbacks are gorgeous and haunting, more so even than the warped inmates on display in Ashcliffe. How much we're drawn in is contingent on DiCaprio's astonishingly good performance. This is the fourth collaboration between him and Scorsese, and the director has done wonders to mature him into more than just a pretty face. With The Aviator and The Departed, DiCaprio has displayed incredible versatility. Here, the actor begins as a film noir cop, but as Ashcliffe works Teddy over, it strips down layers of the character, thus adding layers to the performance. Also wonderful are Kingsley and von Sydow as the sinister doctors, as well as Jackie Earle Haley and Mortimer, who play disturbed patients. Scorsese has brought together an incredible cast, and watching this group of actors bring life to the scenery is surely something to behold. Much will be made of the ending. Some will leave scratching their heads, questioning if it makes any sense. Some will understand that it doesn't necessarily have to make sense. After seeing the film and soaking up the events in the story, Shutter Island will improve if watched again and absorbed as a whole, with the viewer aware of how it ends. There are details throughout that build to and hint at the big reveal coming in the end, and knowing what happens will help involve the viewer on another level. But the film isn't about how the story leads to the twist, the moment that will inevitably lose some viewers incapable of suspending their disbelief. This work of genius is about Scorsese's creation of mood, the incredible swell of suspense of which he's only channeled before in his superb remake of Cape Fear. Scorsese has remarked that with Shutter Island he wanted to make the kind of film that he likes to watch. With that, evident are influences ranging from film noir to Samuel Fuller. High contrast lighting and the 1950s production design capture the noirish tone of the feature, placing the film not in a realistic world, but a world that with its fedoras and stylish dialogue will feel familiar to those versed in the 1950s era of cinema. But Fuller's influence is more specific. In terms of both narrative and setting, Scorsese's film recalls Fuller's Shock Corridor, a picture about a reporter who checks himself into an insane asylum to find a murderer but then goes mad himself. Moreover, Scorsese has taken a concept that would normally be reserved for Fuller's brand of B-movie and elevated it to the level of art. Every set piece in the film is expertly used as a device through which Scorsese builds punishing suspense and furthers the psychological elements of his thriller. Ashcliffe mutates from a massive psych ward into a living expression of the monsters scratching away inside Teddy's post-traumatic stress-infused head. Suddenly the bars, inmates, doctor, and hurricane all have double meanings that apply to Teddy. Throughout, the director maintains an unbelievable tension, as if around every dark corner there's something terrible waiting for Teddy. Sometimes the terrible things are the deranged inmates of Ashcliffe, but mostly they inhabit the horrible memories recalled in Teddy's mind. And with that feeling of uncertainty both in the setting and the protagonist, Scorsese sends his audience reeling in discomfort, fear, and anxiety. It's staggeringly effective. The ending is something in the way of Hitchcock's Psycho, in that what happened isn't as important as the skill with which it's presented. No one thinks of those Hitchcock thrillers and remembers only the ending. Rather, they remember bravado passages such as the shower scene, or the way Anthony Perkins strangely turns his neck when he leans over the counter to examine the registry. Shutter Island is all about those incredible pure cinema details. It's about the setting, the ever-present sense that something is dreadfully off, the ghastly and intriguing dream imagery, and the madhouse presence of the asylum. It's about a mise-en-scene driven by emotion and paranoia and the perpetuation of unknown horrors, the method more than the nature of the madness. The film summons Hitchcock in another way, in that this is Scorsese's Vertigo. Both films contain dream imagery, damaged protagonists plagued by their traumatic past, and propel uncertainty in the viewer about the events therein. In both, what we see doesn't always make logical sense if talked out scene for scene. In a way, each sequence is its own whole. Hitchcock's Vertigo was dismissed as nonsense upon its initial release, much like how the majority of critics are at present shrugging off Shutter Island as merely an ample thriller. But Hitchcock's film is now considered one of the master of suspense's very best. With time, perhaps Scorsese's film will be revisited and appreciated for the atmospheric psychological mind-bender it is. Shutter Island won't be perfect on your first viewing. So see it twice, and the second time around watch it from a distance. Forget about the story and how it manipulates the audience throughout, imperfectly or not. Though the scenario dwells on that recurrent Scorsese theme of guilt management, aligning perfectly within the director's body of work, themes aren't really the purpose of a film like this. Instead, lose yourself in the details, the wicked splendor of the production, the stark power of the visuals, and cinematographer Robert Richardson's shot compositions that are so beautiful they could be framed. Scorsese has conjured up a nightmarish cinematic display of his talents, quite unlike anything he's shown us before. That he's still surprising us with his mastery of the craft after so many years makes it easy to pronounce this film as some kind of masterpiece. It is 1954, in the Boston Harbor Islands. A ferry boat emerges from a thick mist, as below decks a man is puking his guts out. This sequence, which opens Martin Scorsese's latest opus, also sets the tone for what it is to follow, in a film where seemingly everything is shrouded in a fog of mystery, and an air of sickness is never far away. The nauseous man is U.S. Marshal Teddy Daniels, Leonardo DiCaprio, heading out on heaving waters with his new partner Chuck All, Mark Ruffalo, to the Ashecliffe Hospital for the Criminally Insane on Shutter Island. There he is to investigate the recent disappearance of Rachel Solando, Emily Mortimer, a deluded and dangerous filicide who seems to have vanished into thin air from her securely locked cell, leaving behind only a hidden note posing the question, who is 67? Clearly resident psychiatrists Dr. Cawley, Ben Kingsley, and Dr. Naehring, Max von Sydow, know more than they are saying, while just as clearly the Second World War veteran Teddy has come to Shutter Island with his own traumatic baggage and a personal agenda that extends far beyond the missing inmate. For Teddy is still haunted by the horrific death of his wife Dolores, Michelle Williams, 2 years ago, and he believes that her killer, the arsonist Andrew Ladies, Elias Koteas, is hidden away somewhere in the off-limits Ward C. Yet as a powerful storm cuts the island off from all contact with the mainland, a dangerous conspiracy is about to be uncovered, layer by layer, and even Teddy, who was an eyewitness to the human horrors revealed at the liberation of Dachau, cannot quite imagine the monstrous truth buried away on Shutter Island. Dennis Lehane has described his 2003 novel as a hybrid of the Bronte sisters' Gothic writings and Don Siegel's Invasion of the Body Snatchers, 1956, and Scorsese's film adaptation is a similar blend of tempestuous ghost story and pulpy noir, except that few 50s B pictures were made with such loving attention to performance and mise-en-scene. Some viewers may feel that they are well ahead of the curve in this film's twisty narrative, but nothing can take away from Scorsese's absolute mastery of his art, so that even when one has a rough idea of where this mystery thriller is headed, the devil is in the detail, and each turn of the screw is handled with the sort of deft craftsmanship that becomes a pleasure unto itself, quite beyond the game of hermeneutic cat and mouse that the narrative is constantly playing with the viewer. If Scorsese is working within a prescribed genre, he is also presenting us with something that approaches its Platonic form. If Shutter Island feels like cinema at its most quintessential, it is also deeply meta-cinematic. Here Scorsese brings us an ensemble of actors playing actors in a dream world of light and shadow where illusion and the imagination reign, and he veritably drowns his film in allusions, both visual and verbal, to other films, dressing it up in the hermetic trappings of cinema itself. Not that Shutter Island, whether the film or the place, remains entirely sealed from the realities of the outside world, for many of the tensions here derive from the historical setting of the Fifi ties, when the raw traumas of the Second World War were fast being overtaken by Cold War paranoia and a very different kind of war between methodologically opposed branches of psychiatry, some barbaric and some more humane. So underlying the thick fog of fiction that Scorsese wafts over the viewer, there are some difficult truths waiting to emerge, although fantasy wins out in the end, in a manner that is as moving as it is tragic. Like any classic, Shutter Island demands to be revisited several times. Indeed, its sinuous ideas, once they have taken hold in your mind, prove difficult to escape. I'm happy I get to review another Martin Scorsese film. Scorsese is known for making fairly high-quality films, and thankfully, Shutter Island is another one. I wasn't all that worried, with a cast as good as the one this film features, but it's still nice to be able to sit down and really enjoy a movie every now and then. Shutter Island is one of those movies that I really enjoyed. I'm really glad that I got to watch this movie, as it's the kind of film that makes me want to watch over again right after having just seen it. So, I did just that, to see what I missed the first time around. The answer turned out to be a lot. See, Shutter Island has a twist ending, and it is one that has subtle hints dropped about it throughout the course of the film. Even if you look for them, you aren't going to completely guess the ending, but you might be able to get part of it. This is the kind of ending I like. You aren't going to guess it, at least, not all of it. There are enough hints dropped throughout the film so that you will have something to look for on repeat viewings, and even then, you won't find everything. Scorsese manages to still hide things from you, even after seeing the film a few times. That's definitely appreciated, because even after you no longer care much for the story, you'll still be paying fairly close attention. The story is set in an insane asylum, situated on the aptly named Shutter Island. United States Marshal Teddy Daniels, Leonardo DiCaprio, and his partner Chuck All, Mark Ruffalo, are deployed to the island to solve the case of a missing patient. Said patient apparently managed to slip past the guards and get out into the terrain surrounding the asylum. She didn't even bother to take her shoes. That's odd, don't you think? Sooner or later, we begin to question what the true purpose of the asylum is. Is it a place that actually is an asylum? Is its true purpose to perform experiments on its patients? Is the doctor of the island, Ben Kingsley, actually a doctor? Who is Teddy Daniels, and what are his true intentions for being on the island? These are all questions you will be asking yourself both while and after you watch Shutter Island. This is what the film does best. It keeps you thinking, making it one of the more engaging films that I've watched in a while. It doesn't let up in its mystery component, and this is something I'm very thankful of. Shutter Island works on two levels. It is a very solid mystery film, but also works as a good thriller. It keeps you guessing enough to make it work as a mystery, but that isn't the central theme. You want to find out, but the direction you take to get there is more psychological thriller than straight up mystery. This thrilling aspect is also brought across by the actors. Ben Kingsley does a great job in being mysterious, yet still a fairly likable character. The two U.S. Marshals are also played really well, with DiCaprio proving again that he can play both a dramatic and an action role. It's not entirely convincing when he's scaling walls of the asylum, but for the most part, he does his job quite well, especially when it comes to the more dramatic parts of the film. Something that really stands out with Shutter Island is the background sounds and music used. They are used in a way that increases the tension, and enhances the atmosphere and immersion that the film goes for. It helps build the mood, and enhances almost everything about the film. Normally, a good soundtrack is one that goes unnoticed, but in this case, the soundtrack is great, and noticeable. The only problems that the film has comes from the fact that it lasts a slight bit longer than it should, and it doesn't develop its secondary characters enough. We get to know a lot about Teddy Daniels, where he's from and his motives, but the rest of the cast goes unexplored. The film also goes on for a slight bit too long. It doesn't make it too boring, and it isn't like the running time harms the film a great deal, but there are some scenes that could have been cut and the same impact would have been felt. Shutter Island is the kind of film I hadn't seen in a while. It's a very good psychological thriller that also doubles as a mystery film. This mystery is more of the audience than the film's characters, and it keeps you guessing throughout. What will the ending bring us? That's a question that you will ask throughout the film. The main character is interesting, although you don't get enough of the supporting cast to make up for the quality of the talent used. It's still a great film, one that you'll want to rewatch sooner rather than later. Drama is set in 1954, U.S. Marshal Teddy Daniels, Leonardo DiCaprio, is investigating the disappearance of a murderess who escaped from a hospital for the criminally insane and is presumed to be hiding on the remote Shutter Island. I eventually got to the cinema last night to see Shutter Island, a film I saw the trailer for the first time about 9 months ago. Before they pushed back the release date, and I have been extremely curious since then to what exactly this film was going to be about. The trailer is one of those that really makes you want to see the film, as you want to know what exactly Shutter Island is and what exactly happened. The film begins with U.S. Marshal Teddy Daniels meeting his new partner Chuck for the first time on a ferry heading into Shutter Island. A bit of a mystery place which is home to the criminally insane, but what exactly goes on in Shutter Island? And how long will it take us to find out? This is a type of film which is a total nightmare to review, as different events which occur are key points in the plot and total spoilers, so I cannot really state much of what actually happened in the film. I don't want to spoil it. But it really does all come together in the end, and while you may guess parts of it, I think it would be pretty impossible to guess the whole outcome. However, when you think back to some of the clues, it all makes sense and you really wonder how you missed those clues in relation to the ending. but it gives you so many thinking points it actually confuses you so much. I felt like that all the way through, coming up with different theories and possibilities. It's quite good being able to do that with a film and get totally lost in the plot because you're trying to figure it all out. Performance-wise, Leonardo DiCaprio continues to show us that he really is a brilliant actor and takes you on a journey with his character, really feeling for him throughout. Mark Ruffalo was solid as his partner and they worked well in some rather amusing exchanges. Ben Kingsley was brilliantly creepy and you're not sure how his character is going to go, but surely doing what he does best. I couldn't help but think of Cape Fear at times, with this being a Scorsese film too. The music added into the film really did make it that extra bit creepy and have you on the edge of your seat, not sure if something that was about to happen was going to make you jump. I would recommend this film as it really was a good cinematic experience, plus the more people you know who have seen it, the more chance you have to talk about it, as it is difficult to tell people about it if they have not seen it. You don't want to spoil it for them. For my first official review, I wanted to do a film that most people enjoy but often forget about until it's brought up and then you go, oh yeah, I loved that film. Shutter Island perhaps most perfectly encapsulates that very feeling. Director Martin Scorsese has built a reputation over many decades of work as one of the most prestigious filmmakers in Hollywood, but this film is an oddity for him, not because of a drop-off in quality, but the content stands out dramatically when you compare it with his other work. His filmography has an abundance of gangster films, Robert De Niro, and Joe Pesci. Shutter Island is not like any of those. Shutter Island is a mystery thriller, with a nice splash of horror mixed in for good measure. The film stars Scorsese's new golden boy and De Niro's spiritual successor, Leonardo DiCaprio, as U.S. Federal Marshal Teddy Daniels, alongside Mark Ruffalo's Marshal Chuck All, both sporting some strong Bostonian accents and over-the-top precancerous cigarette addictions, both of which I am here for. The two marshals are brought to Shutter Island, which hosts a mental hospital for the criminally insane run by Ben Kingsley's Dr. Cawley, because one of the patients has escaped. On the island, however, the marshals discover a greater conspiracy than they were brought there for. Shutter Island is an exceptionally tense experience from the very beginning when Marshal Daniels is vomiting from seasickness. At no point does the viewer have the opportunity to relax because it is clear that things are not what they seem. You are as on your guard as the marshals are. This is exacerbated by the brilliant technical aspects of the film. The score is haunting, ominous, and powerful. The use of lighting to convey the stress and physical pain was brilliant. There is one scene in particular, where Marshal Daniels is suffering from a migraine, and the lighting used is so piercing that it almost hurts the viewer. But you'll be damned if you aren't craving relief from the intense pain just the same as the marshal. Furthermore, the lighting is of the utmost importance as it is a great tell for how in the dark he is to what is really going on around him. Similarly, the sound editing process that the film underwent does more than just add intensity, it adds to mystery. There are key moments of the film where dialogue is not totally clear, but clear enough that the brain fills in the gaps to what we think they said. And the constructed dialogue makes sense, only to be later revealed that we all missed one key word that totally changed the meaning of what was said. It is a brilliant trick. Like with any great mystery film, this film relies on a twist ending that the viewer is not supposed to see coming. In some cases, an ending such as this can be considered a novelty that only really has an impact upon the first viewing, and while it is true you will never truly be able to recreate the sense of unknown in subsequent viewings, Shutter Island does offer reasons to watch it multiple times. If a mystery has been done correctly, subtle hints should have been sprinkled throughout the film prior to the reveal. Most of these hints had no significance to the viewer before they knew what it was they were hinting at, but it is only with subsequent viewings that we can all truly appreciate how intricately the seeds of mystery were woven into the story. It may come as no surprise that the acting in the film is exceptional. DiCaprio, who won a Best Actor Oscar in 2016, is one of the finest actors of any generation, so complimenting his work is fairly commonplace. What makes this performance stand out amongst his other work is just how much this film relied on him. In most films, there are scenes that do not involve the main character, often for exposition or to reveal something the viewers. But not Shutter Island. In the roughly 2 hours and 18 minutes runtime, he is on screen for virtually all of it. With the exception of a few landscape shots and opposing conversational camera angles, Leo never leaves the view of the camera. It may not seem like that big of a deal, but I challenge you to find any film that relies that heavily on the presence of its lead. The story focuses so intently on who Teddy Daniels is as a person, and it takes a special performance to portray paranoia, confidence, aggression, and intelligence all in one. Mark Ruffalo does a great job as well, albeit his burden not quite the same as Leo. Ben Kingsley and Max von Sydow both play their roles with exceptional tact, portraying doctors with both noble intentions and possibly sinister undertones. Their European accents certainly help in that department as well. The film is not flawless, however. In the latter part of the film, I couldn't help but be aware of the very obvious green screen use. Perhaps this is where the use of lighting actually hurts the film. DiCaprio and Ruffalo are standing on some cliffs, and even to the untrained eye, you can see that the actors were most certainly not outside. I would give it a pass, possibly since the effects could have been convincing for the time, but this film is only 9 years old at the time of me writing this. CGI and green screen usage were not foreign concepts in 2010. Ultimately, it is not a huge deal and does not ruin the film, but it is a noticeable flaw. Also, there are a few parts of the story that upon careful review do not make logical sense. Specifically, why would the overseers allow for the events of the film to take place during a hurricane? It makes for a more dramatic and stressful story, but it seems unreasonable when you stop to think about it. But I know I am just nitpicking. Shutter Island through its narrative discusses themes of acceptable violence, acceptance of reality, and the morality of certain psychological treatments. There is a running comparison made throughout the film of the Nazis in World War II. Marshall Daniels was part of the liberating force of the Dachau concentration camps, and he is fearful that the actions of the Nazis could be replicated. Also, harboring the burden of his own lethal actions during the war, the Marshal questions the morality of these criminally insane patients, the use of lethal force, and the ability to accept responsibility for your actions. This is a film that I fear gets forgotten amongst its peers because it doesn't quite fit in. It is a very competently created film with a lot to offer any viewer, whether they are just looking for an entertaining thriller, or wish to examine a technically sound film. Shutter Island is a solid psychological drama anchored by a great lead performance by Leonardo DiCaprio, masterful and patient direction by Martin Scorsese, and a genuinely creepy atmosphere that permeates every scene. To say this is Hitchcock-esque is an understatement. I wish the whole thing had been shot in black and white. While the deliberate pacing and over-explanatory ending are sure to divide crowds, what still remains is one of the finest mind-benders in recent years. DiCaprio stars as Teddy Daniels, a U.S. Marshal dispatched to the remote Shutter Island with his partner, Chuck Ruffalo, to investigate the escape of a dangerous, mentally ill patient from the institution located on the island. Shutter Island houses only the most disturbed patients, and the head of the institution, Dr. Colley Kingsley, firmly believes that each patient can be rehabilitated with the proper care. What clues there are regarding the patient's disappearance does not add up, and soon Daniels himself begins experiencing hallucinations and flashbacks. He begins to question his own sanity, and given some of the island's revelations, he has good reason to. Punctuated by a haunting score of horns and strings, director Martin Scorsese establishes and maintains a chilling atmosphere. There are no cheap thrills here, and the flashbacks to Daniels' time in the army during World War II are haunting and add a whole new layer to an already engaging story. Leonardo DiCaprio's screenplay keeps the exposition coming, and the film's lengthy 20-minute explanation is sure to start some conversations. Contrary to conventional thrillers, I don't think the viewer is supposed to be overly shocked by the film's twist. Stay away from the early trailers, as they do divulge too much. It doesn't take long to begin piecing it together. View the picture as more of a puzzle whose pieces are already on the table. DiCaprio continues to excel under Scorsese's direction, and it's no wonder that the director keeps coming back to him. DiCaprio is convincing through and through, even as his character continues to unravel. The supporting cast is similarly impressive, led by a nice return to form by Ben Kingsley. Very few can be as calm and collected, yet as creepy as Kingsley. Also of note are Max von Sydow as a mad doctor, Jackie Earle Haley as a truly damaged patient, and Ted Levine as the warden. He and DiCaprio share a jeep ride that is one of the film's most effective sequences. Shutter Island is being slightly mismarketed as a horror/thriller. There are elements of each to be found, but this is undoubtedly more a drama. Those expecting a thrill a minute will be bored, but this marks the much-needed return of what appeared to be a dormant niche genre. This is for the crowd who likes having a filmmaker mess with their head. Hitchcock is and always will be the master, but Scorsese has proven to be a worthy pupil, and Shutter Island is a worthy addition to an already illustrious career. Like with many films that have their release dates moved around, I was skeptical of Shutter Island. As in, I was expecting nothing. I was pleasantly surprised. I have to admit, I don't really know much about Martin Scorsese. I say things like that and people are all, "What kind of a film buff are you?" I'm not a film buff. I like watching films, but I wouldn't say I know any more than the average person. See what I did there? In fact, when it comes to the classics, I know less than most people. Okay, I've seen the likes of Citizen Kane, 10/10, and Seven Samurai, 8/10, but I've never seen the Godfather trilogy or any Hitchcock films. But back to Scorsese. I've seen a couple of his films. I liked Goodfellas enough. I thought The Departed was pretty decent, though I did prefer the original Hong Kong film star. Taxi Driver I wasn't so pushed on. If I had been in my late teens/early 20s, I might have thought it was a work of genius, but as is was, I'm just not that angry anymore. So anyway, it's not like I was going to Shutter Island expecting something amazing. Now, it wasn't amazing, but it was very good. Far better than I had been expecting. It started off a bit ominously. I did not like the hysterical music at the start at all, but I think that was just a bit of a misjudgment. In general, I thought the score was very good, atmospheric. I really thought it set the tone. I found the film an unsettling watch, which was completely unexpected. It's very rare that I'd be put off kilter by a film. In fact, the last film was probably The Exorcist, and before that perhaps Seven, which I saw in the cinema. Course, Criminal Minds freaks me out all the time, but that's different. Popcorn TV, I don't think too hard about it after. Films are judged under a different light. I do hope you go see Shutter Island. It's a classic, well-crafted thriller, and there's good performances all round. I suppose there is a chance that not everyone will like it. One friend of mine really seemed to hate it. I'm not really sure why, but then I'm not that inclined to ask. I can see how, if you weren't in the mood for it, you might find some of the more obvious devices very jarring. I didn't, and to be honest, I don't think the average person will either. There's a lot for people to enjoy about this film if you just take it at face value. There's more there too if you decide to look a bit harder at it, but I don't think that's necessary to enjoy it at all. I will say this though, I'm faintly worried by how surprised I was that it was a good film. It made me worry that I may have lowered my standards too much. Perhaps I expect so little now that anything good is impressive. As I'm sure you remember from other posts of mine, I go out of my way to expect nothing. Perhaps I've been going a bit too far out of my way. But that's by the by. I'll want to see a few more good films, like this one, before I start upping my expectations again. I think I'd get depressed if I started to expect good films. You need a buffer when you see as many films as I do. Shutter Island's premise, at first, seems very similar to the mystery film and novel template. Starring Leonardo DiCaprio as U.S. Marshal Teddy Daniels, it masquerades as a gritty noir movie. Teddy Daniels visits a hospital for the criminally insane investigating the disappearance of the murderer of his wife. Taking place in 1954, Shutter Island has all the elements of a noir movie. Teddy Daniels and his partner Chuck all are comparable to the main characters of these films of the past, from the backstory and personality to even the wardrobe. Like these other investigators, Teddy is a hardened war veteran with a skill of reading people and a knack for deduction and logic. Throughout the film, Teddy encounters and clashes with the hospital staff who are hostile and non-compliant with him. He has to rely on breaking rules to further the case. And as all noir films do, what should be a simple investigation soon becomes complicated. Just like in The Big Sleep and The Maltese Falcon, the plot thickens, new characters appear, already known characters change, and subplots appear. As the movie progresses, Teddy Daniels uncovers a deep conspiracy that includes government research, mind control, and forced lobotomies. This is where the movie departs from its noir basis and enters the world of psychological thrillers in what I think is a crazy and interesting way. This departure is critical to the movie's plot and is what makes the movie so great. This noir story being told turns out to be just that, a story. All of the characters' backstory and potential conspiracies are made up subconsciously by Teddy, Andrew Ladies. It's interesting to see that Teddy, Andrew's delusions take inspiration from the films and novels that take part in the exact era that he lives in. Martin Scorsese is commonly referred to as the greatest living American film director, even at times when he doesn't quite deserve it. To be fair, Scorsese is considerably prolific, involved not just with feature film directing, but also working as a television series producer and pop cultural documentarian, as well as being a film restoration proponent and historian. Indeed, I have to admit that in recent years I've become more of a fan of Scorsese's work as a film historian than as a director. That's not to sell his directing work short, The Departed ranked as my #1 film of that year. But when compared to his volatile and vibrant earlier classics, including Mean Streets, Taxi Driver, and Goodfellas, all starring Robert De Niro, later works such as Gangs of New York and The Aviator, all starring Leonardo DiCaprio, have a certain remoteness that, deliberate or not, often creates a cold disconnect for viewers. For this reason, among others, the effectively unsettling yet genre-conventional Shutter Island falls squarely into the latter category. Those familiar with Scorsese's well-documented cinematic influences and admirations should not be surprised to learn that his latest film, a rare foray into genre filmmaking, and the oft-derided horror genre at that, is one part Val Lewton atmospheric thriller, particularly, see his films Bedlam and I Walked with a Zombie, 2 parts Sam Fuller's bravura mental institution crime yarn, Shock Corridor, with a little of Antonioni's El Aventura thrown in. That is to say, those currently dismissing Shutter Island for merely being a horror film, and therefore beneath greatest living American director Scorsese, are simply ignorant of his own influences and admirations. They don't know Scorsese well enough, and are dismissing Shutter Island for the wrong reasons. And to what level it deserves to be legitimately dismissed is debatable. Adapted from a novel by Dennis Lehane, Shutter Island is essentially long stretches of expository exchanges punctuated with moments of sheer utter horror, deriving from madness. The true stars of this film are cinematographer Robert Richardson, production designer Dante Ferretti, and editor Thelma Schoonmaker. Their work here is among the best of their careers, collectively evoking a Kubrickian aesthetic reminiscent of The Shining and Eyes Wide Shut. As Kubrickian as this film can be, I wouldn't be surprised if it ultimately enjoys the arc of appreciation most Kubrick films experienced, 10 years of being considered a disappointment, then giving way to being acknowledged from then on as ingenious. If so, I'll stay historically true to form, count me squarely in the disappointment category, at least to a point. I acknowledge that there is much to appreciate about this film, but after the long slog that it is, it leaves us wondering what the point is, and I don't think that's in a good way. As of this writing, I'm convinced that at the end of the day, well, at the end of the film, Shutter Island is simply a really scary, but really unwieldy, horror film, that and that alone being the point. There has certainly been unsettling horror films built around themes of mental unraveling and insanity. That is not new. What Scorsese seems to be attempting to bring to the table is a heightened level of real-life, relatable horror that triggers and accompanies the events of the film. Inescapable sins of the past. Wartime atrocities. The death of a spouse. And perhaps the most universal horror of all, the murder of one's own children, the killer residing within the family. Again, evoking The Shining. It's all laid out on screen in a lucid and unflinching way, and it does resonate. But with themes like that, it's almost hard for it not to. The story begins with U.S. Marshal Teddy Daniels, Leonardo DiCaprio, and his new partner, Mark Ruffalo, arriving to a prison-like island-based facility for the mentally deranged to investigate the mysterious disappearance of an inmate, make that patient. It's 1954, and the shifting theories of popular psychiatry are playing themselves out among the facility's powers that be, played by Ben Kingsley, the benevolent one, and Max von Sydow, the inhumane one. Daniel's investigation gives way to his own complex conspiracy theories about what really happens on Shutter Island, and after a while, no one can be trusted as the original mission is all but forgotten in a downward spiral of upending information, false leads, and bizarre interactions. The audience is shuffled from one long-winded exchange after another, some of it pertinent information, much of it horse crap. All the while, the nightmarish flashbacks and environments of the film keep everything on edge. Scorsese has never been one for tying everything up with a nice bow at the end, but in this case, after 2.5 hours of being told one thing, then the opposite, then back again, and ending up nowhere, it's easy not to be satisfied this time. It should also be said that thematically speaking, many in the audience might find this a shockingly disturbing film. I'm sure scores of patrons will go in expecting an entertaining twisty psychological thriller, but will exit ever so traumatized. The fact that it all plays like a conventional nihilistic horror film makes it all the more so. That point, right there, could be the ultimate subversion of this film. This is no doubt a film that rewards multiple viewings, as it's loaded with layers of nuances, hints, and clues, but for me, I don't know of a time when I'll be revisiting this island. Maybe in 10 years, we'll see. Scorsese may very well be America's greatest living film director, but they can't all be Oscar winners. I'll give him a pass on this one, and hope for something less clunky and more personal next time, be it genre-based or not. Who would have thought that Leonardo DiCaprio would be one of the greatest actors that would star in a lot of great blockbuster movies? One of these movies would be Shutter Island, 2010. This was one of the best movies that I have seen DiCaprio in next to Inception. Shutter Island is about a man who was sent to an island in 1954. U.S. Marshal Teddy Daniels is assigned to investigate the disappearance of a patient from Shutter Island's Ashecliffe Hospital in Boston. This movie co-stars Ben Kingsley, Mark Ruffalo, and Michelle Williams, just to name a few. There are a lot of twists and turns in this movie. The atmosphere was eerie, very confusing, and it got more and more complicated as things started happening that Teddy does not know about. As Teddy Daniels goes closer and closer to the truth regarding this case, the more he gets confused about himself. He starts to question his own self, his own sanity and psyche. And as he does that, the audience, like myself, does so too. There is not one dull moment in this film. The drama and acting is great. The actors were really convincing. Leonardo DiCaprio does a great job portraying the role of the now confused Teddy Daniels, who really must find out the truth about Shutter Island and its inhabitants. The ending really surprised me. I loved how it twisted everything that I know about the situation, and it got clearer by the end. This was one of the greatest movies in 2010, of course, until Inception came out. The direction was great. The cinematography captured the confusion and the coldness and eeriness of the island itself. I love this film, and so did a lot of viewers. I offer a warning prior to you reading this review. If you didn't rush out to the cinema to see the visual and sensory spectacle that is Shutter Island, then you have slid down the scale on which I estimate a person's worth. This review is for those who have seen Shutter Island and were enthralled in every single twist and turn. Shutter Island was phenomenal the first time I watched it, and it got even better second time around as I could see and appreciate the fine details that went into telling a seat-gripping story. Shutter Island is a twisting, turning, gripping, thrilling, sensationally chilling film from its opening shots to its final scene. As an audience member in the cinema, I was there with Teddy, Leonardo DiCaprio, every step of the way. Willing him on, watching his back and trying to piece together the clues. I was also just as clueless to the truth as Teddy himself. On my second viewing at home, I was of a different position. The second time you watch Shutter Island, it's even more beautiful than the first. You can see the clues, the red herrings, the tricks, the hints, lies, and truth. On second viewing, I found a whole new level of appreciation for the film. Teddy Daniels was the 67th patient of Ashcliffe Mental Hospital. And I could see it. On first viewing, I was confused at times, second-guessing the clues and trying to figure what was real. I thought that the opening scene on the ferry, in which Teddy meets his new partner, Chuck, Mark Ruffalo, for the first time, didn't cut together well, and it unnerved me slightly. It continued through the film to the point where Dolores, Michelle Williams, is holding a bottle of whiskey and then appears to be holding nothing. A little later, the patient Mrs. Kearns, Robin Bartlett, is handed a glass of water and then seemingly drinks from an imaginary glass, before placing a half-full glass back on the table. Something wasn't right, and I knew it. These things were clear to me the first time around. Second time around, I saw a whole lot more. When Teddy and Chuck arrive on the island to be greeted by Deputy Warden McPherson, John Carroll Lynch, he comments that everyone is on edge that day. This is because their most dangerous patient, Andrew Ladies, is roaming free. Teddy then tells Chuck that he has seen this type of electrical fence before, because he has been a prisoner there for the past 2 years. Dr. Colley, Sir Ben Kingsley, is very playful with Teddy and is clearly hiding information from him, because this is all a big charade. The orderlies seem to know more than they let on. The patients repeat the same story told to Teddy by Dr. Colley. The telephone conveniently doesn't work. Teddy cannot see the patient's records. One patient smiles at Teddy. Another puts her finger to her lips to shush Teddy. All of which are because this is a game. When the guards are searching the rocks for Rachel Solando, they look as though they aren't really putting any effort into the search, because no one is really missing. The scene in the cell when Teddy meets Rachel, Emily Mortimer, doesn't feel natural. Lots of the encounters Teddy has do not feel natural. Or real. And they aren't. The whole charade created by Dr. Colley is so brilliant the second time around. Rather than being with Teddy on his search, you can sit back and look at the film objectively, which allows you to click onto all these other hints and tricks. Martin Scorsese has masterfully created this film to get the audience bought into Teddy's journey, only to shatter it with the revelation that it is all in his imagination. He offers up so many suggestions as to what is real, but at first glance we disregard. All the above clues are so clearly visible on your second watch. Similarly with Chuck's character. First time around, I knew he wasn't being genuine. His little speech in the graveyard about all this being a trick to get Teddy to the island seemed to be offered up too easily. He was always there offering information, nudging Teddy in the right direction and making me suspicious. However, second time around it is so brilliant. Chuck tells Teddy that the world doesn't work this way. He's telling him that all this isn't real. He spells it out for him. But Teddy doesn't see it. And neither did I. The scene in which Teddy and Chuck interview Mrs. Kearns, she is asked what she thinks of Dr. Sheehan. Her eyes dart to Chuck for a second, and then back to Teddy. She tells him Dr. Sheehan is easy on the eyes and looks again back to Chuck. Chuck smiles a little and looks at Teddy. First time around it seemed innocent enough. Second time around with the knowledge that Chuck is indeed Dr. Sheehan, it seems so clever. When Teddy then asks her if she knows of Andrew Latees, she becomes distressed for seemingly no apart reason. Second time we know she is looking straight at Andrew Latees. If only I had realized this the first time around, I may have solved this case before Teddy and proven myself smarter than the film. But, I didn't. And I am not. The first time I saw Shutter Island, I was convinced that this was all to trick the U.S. Marshal Teddy Daniels and keep him on the island, quiet. When the film finished, I was still unsure as to what was real and what wasn't. I questioned and second-guessed my theories and what I had seen. Was Teddy/Andrew crazy? Did he get better? I am now confident that I have amassed enough of the pieces of the jigsaw to see the picture clearly. When Dr. Sheehan sits with Andrew and they share a smoke, he refers to him as Chuck and has seemingly relapsed. Then Andrew/Teddy remarks to Dr. Sheehan/Chuck that he wonders what's worse, to live as a monster, or die as a good man. For me, that was his decision, that if he couldn't live in his oblivious fantasy world as the war hero and U.S. Marshal Teddy Daniels, then he would rather not live as anyone. Andrew Latees created his fantasy world because he couldn't live with the reality of what he had done. Andrew Latees then chose a lobotomy. No memories. No thoughts. No problems. On Blu-ray the film is spectacular and every tiny detail is clear as daylight. In the World War II flashbacks, every flake of snow that falls is so clear. As Teddy twitches and sweats on his journey to uncover the truth, we can see all the finest details of DiCaprio's face. When Chuck and Teddy share a smoke, the smallest whips of smoke shimmer in the lighting as they glide upwards and disperse. Shutter Island is easily the best film of 2010 and Oscar-worthy, with a master class on creating suspense. Martin Scorsese is on top form, as are DiCaprio and Sir Ben Kingsley. The film's soundtrack is eerie and unnerving, as it should be in a thriller, with Scorsese collaborating with Robbie Robertson to collect together the music from already recorded sources rather than an original score. Scorsese steals a few tried and tested tricks on suspense from the master, Hitchcock, as he continually unnerves the audience and offers up truth and lies at a breakneck pace. The story is brilliant and unfolds so as to not allow your brain to disengage for even a second. Every piece of this film fits together perfectly to create an outstanding puzzle that is complex, multi-layered, and keeps you on the edge of your seat from start to finish. Watch it twice and pay attention. Your sanity will be questioned. There are certain movies that absolutely knock your socks off, and this movie is one of them. The movie starts with U.S. Marshals Teddy Daniels, Leonardo DiCaprio, and Chuck Mark Ruffalo, as they are on a boat heading to a mental institution located on Shutter Island to investigate the disappearance of one of the patients. The entire movie does a wonderful job maintaining a constant tone. It does not try to include out-of-place jokes or lines that have no meaning. Some of the scenes where there is no background sound, and it's just a character, bring out a thrilling aspect to watching the movie. The sound and cinematography are a work of art. The night scenes and dark scenes were able to bring a horror element to the story, and the sound just enhanced all scenes even more. The portrayal of Teddy losing his mind in scenes is shot very well and is able to show what is happening to him. The movie does a great job of not only showing how far you can manipulate and gaslight someone just by using words like who and what. The majority of the movie is from Leo's perspective, and seeing it all unravel from his perspective that comes from his grief and trauma that is shown using scenes about his past when he attacked a Nazi concentration camp. The scenes of him talking to his wife Dolores Janal, Michelle Williams, the scene with George Noyce, Jackie Haley, and his scenes with Mark Ruffalo are full of details and information that is unknowingly critical to the plot. The unraveling will eventually have you questioning if Leo is really being tricked or he is just being delusional. You might also get tricked with the amount of small twists and reveals. His acting is the best of the movie, and because he is given a lot to work with, it shows how much range he has and how brilliant he can be. The climax of him realizing that he is actually a patient and not a U.S. Marshal anymore was bonkers. The scene that revealed that his kids were killed by his wife, and him finding out and trying to save them and then him killing his wife. The whole sequence made my soul feel so heavy, it was gut-wrenching to watch. The mental illness of the wife was conveyed very easily but was able to show how complex her situation really was. The story from the beginning is completely different from the ending. It is a true psychological thriller that has you on your feet at all times. To be able to guess the story, you have to pay sharp attention to the details and not take anything lightly, as each of the scenes are all connected in one way or another. The phrases and the names all connect, and when it unravels throughout the movie, it is a shock that you do not expect. I've realized that the key to watching movies made by older directors and just generally is to just sit and watch the movie. Your focus needs to be on the scene that is playing, and there should be no theorizing or predictions. Reason being, you might end up in a rabbit hole of crazy thoughts that will ruin the experience. The movie is one of the best I have seen so far in my challenge and a must-watch if you are a fan of this genre. Kitsch is most enjoyable when it doesn't know it's kitsch. Everyone involved in Shutter Island, most obviously director Martin Scorsese and star Leonardo DiCaprio, seem to be taking this berserk, meandering story absolutely seriously, which only serves to make an already fun psychological thriller all the more ludicrous and entertaining. The film is set in 1954. DiCaprio plays Teddy Daniels, a U.S. Marshal dispatched to the titular ocean-bound asylum to investigate the disappearance of a criminally insane inmate from her locked cell. He soon begins to suspect that this remote facility isn't all it appears. Is Ben Kingsley's avuncular psychiatrist really as kindly and welfare-conscious as he seems? Why are the guards so heavily armed? And what's with the mysterious lighthouse that all the patients seem so terrified of? To make matters worse, there's a hurricane coming in, the generators are on the blink, and Teddy's new partner Chuck, Mark Ruffalo, is starting to look decidedly shifty. Taxi driver, this ain't. Actually, the Scorsese movie it most resembles is his previous exercise in Hitchcockian overkill, 1991's Cape Fear. With DiCaprio rather limp and forgettable in the lead, Shutter Island lacks the centrifugal might of De Niro's powerhouse central performance in the earlier film. But it compensates with pure visual, oral, and narrative excess. This is modern Gothic taken to its logical extreme, a work of pure operatic delirium. The closest Shutter Island gets to a commanding, De Niro-like presence might be its perverse, overbearing soundtrack, a selection of the most doom-laden pieces by modern composers ranging from Christoph Penderecki to Max Richter. Every twist in the tale is accompanied by a frenzied flurry of violins, every moment of violence underscored by a pounding, atonal piano crescendo. While the narrative, adapted from Dennis Lehane's 2003 novel, is hopelessly convoluted, the film is held together by the sheer bludgeoning force of Scorsese's directorial vision. Never one to shy away from visual overindulgence, Scorsese has used Shutter Island as an excuse to really throw open his box of tricks, chucking in gaudy but strikingly beautiful dream sequences, harrowing, if rather tasteless, concentration camp flashbacks, and the most thunderous, howling rainstorms this side of Suspiria. In fact, Argento's film, a similarly monumental and manic triumph of style over substance, may be the most appropriate comparison here. And while Scorsese may lack the Jallo master's manic invention, the tension between his natural tendency towards old-fashioned Hollywood classicism and his evident desire to cut loose gives the film its strange, irresistible power. As senseless, perverse, and unwieldy as it undoubtedly is, Shutter Island might be Scorsese's most enjoyable film in a decade. Scorsese is a legendary director, but more often I find I can work out his films from the get-go, and this one I called in the intro and then didn't enjoy a single second of the movie because for me it was so clear what was going on. But in hindsight I can see the appeal for anyone who didn't click what was going on. It must have been gripping and playing on all of their emotions. After ruining the movie for myself, I gave it a few years until I tried again. At this point I thought I'd go through the motions, but seconds into the movie that dreaded feeling came back, and I knew exactly how this movie was going to play out, and for some reason it wasn't even a matter of enjoying the movie play out, but it just felt like I'd seen it all before. Obviously the movie has been influential over a number of second-rate imitations and little bits recreated here and there, All of this second-hand media melds into one big déjà vu comedy moment, which is a problem for big successful projects like this. With The Simpsons, Family Guy, and a number of comedy sketches and stand-up artist mimicking scenes, the memes will then begin, and this is the first step of a movie being lost to mass cultural memory. I detective, searching for a missing asylum patient, however with the facility, located on a remote island and boasting maximum security, somehow no one can find the woman, but how can that be? There are lots of similarly obscure questions that get raised as the faded detective rages around desperately searching with his cool partner Chuck Ruffalo, following his lead. This was supposed to be Scorsese's experimental B-movie effort, doesn't tick a single B-movie box. A consulted film noir Tykes police investigation that runs for 2 hours doesn't rub shoulders with anything on the indie scene. The incredible movie techniques and Scorsese's incredible ability to create stellar blockbuster took over the project. Having an almost unlimited budget doesn't give credence to what indie directors have to face. But there's no denying that he's made an attractive-looking movie based on the thriller from Dennis Lehane, who is the author of other books translated the film like Mystic River and Gone Baby Gone. The setting is a 1950s America, where U.S. Army personnel are attempting to fit into normal life, such as U.S. Marshal Teddy Daniels, DiCap, who passes the movie in perpetual spiritual pain. It's clear that he's seen his fair share of horrors, but he's never had to face them straight on like this. But somehow the shadowy staff start to work their magic on the detective, who begins to feel as if he's under scrutiny. Ben Kingsley plays the ever-emotionless and aloof pipe-smoking Dr. John Cawley. He comes across as a man who's barely in charge of the facility. One of his leading members of staff, Dr. Jeremiah Ehring, Max von Sydow, whose Germanness annoys Teddy to no end and brings up all of his terrible war memories, yet Ehring just cracks those wry smiles as he dismantles each of Teddy's arguments. With a troubled past, his war record and the death of his wife, Teddy begins to struggle through these duties. Initially he's made unwell by the choppy waters as he heads to the foreboding Shutter Island, a former prison, turned into a maximum security facility for the criminally insane, and his constant fear of watery environments begins to dominate his persona. He's pushed by his duties but driven by the desire that his wife's killer might be locked away inside the facility also, so he has a lot of personal sleuthing to do in between his main case as he breaks from character and begins probing into areas that are clearly off limits and finding more than his psyche can deal with. It's hard to see the movie as anything other than a pulpy melodrama. It's well acted and you can't fault Scorsese's direction in its application, but when he decides that he's run with the policy story enough, he attempts to hammer the twist in the plot home like he's hitting a home run. Martin Scorsese's adaptation of the novel Shutter Island, by Mystic River and Gone Baby Gone author Dennis Lehane, is a film that operates on a heightened level that almost makes a traditional narrative analysis redundant. While the core story of two U.S. Marshals in 1954 investigating the seemingly impossible disappearance of an escapee from an island-based prison for the criminally insane is compelling, the film's ultimate achievement is its manipulation of perception on a filmic level. Even elements that may trick the untrained eye and ear into thinking that they are experiencing a flawed film are deliberately calculated stylistic and narrative elements that only fully make sense after the final denouement. Scorsese has often displayed a subjective flair in his filmmaking, particularly in early films such as Mean Streets, Taxi Driver, and Raging Bull. In Shutter Island he pushes this one step further by representing Shutter Island's Ashecliffe Hospital for the criminally insane as an almost otherworldly place designed to snare and foil U.S. Marshal Teddy Daniels. Played by Leonardo DiCaprio in one of his strongest performances to date, Daniels is a classic melancholic masculine Scorsese protagonist. Daniels is haunted by the death of his wife and his experiences as a soldier liberating the Dachau concentration camp. He is unpredictable, volatile, and easily provoked. Yet he also possesses aspects of Twin Peaks' memorable Special Agent Dale Cooper character in that he has a brilliant investigative mind, he is intuitive and he seems to receive information about the case from his dreams. While there are elements of Shutter Island that would not feel out of place in a David Lynch film, Scorsese's real point of reference must surely be Stanley Kubrick's The Shining. Scorsese may have even read Jeffrey Cox's book The Wolf at the Door, where Cox argues that the subtext of The Shining was the Holocaust. Not only does Scorsese use a lot of music by the Kubrick-favored composer György Ligeti, but the use of sound, tracking shots and production design distinctively presents the Ashecliffe Hospital in a similar way to the Overlook Hotel in The Shining. Both are buildings filled with labyrinthine spaces that threaten to consume their occupants. Shutter Island is the work of a true master who is completely accomplished in the art of filmmaking. It is apparent from almost the beginning of Shutter Island that there is something strange going on, and the enjoyment is in the experience of watching it all unfold. Shutter Island is a film that leaves you feeling satisfied, but during the end credits your brain will start to churn. As the film's impact sinks deeper and deeper into your mind, you will start to truly appreciate how ingenious it is on so many levels. An hour later you will be making plans to see it again. 4 years after finally getting the award hardware he's richly deserved for, the last 30 years or so, Martin Scorsese is back with his follow-up feature to The Departed. Teaming up once again with Leonardo DiCaprio, he's created a tight psychological thriller that seems great while you're watching it, but less so the more you reflect on it afterwards. There is no respite from darkness in Shutter Island, as it plunges us immediately into the creepy, intense atmosphere of its eponymous locale. Federal Marshal Teddy Daniels, DiCaprio, already has a bad feeling about the place as it emerges from the fog, and that feeling isn't going to let up anytime soon. The island houses a facility for the criminally insane, and Teddy and his new partner, Chuck Mark Ruffalo, have been sent to investigate the disappearance of Rachel Solando, Emily Mortimer, one of the inmates. By all appearances, Rachel has simply vanished, escaping from her locked cell with its barred window and making her way across the island's rocky terrain without any shoes. There's no trace of her except for a note she left behind, inquiring as to the identity of patient 67. Teddy is constantly at odds with the staff, particularly Dr. Cawley, Ben Kingsley, whom he believes is actively trying to impede the investigation, and Dr. Naering, Max von Sydow, whose accent brings back Teddy's memories of liberating Dachau and the horrors he encountered there. He's increasingly convinced that, like the Nazis, this particular facility is conducting experiments on people, and he's certain that these experiments are taking place inside the lighthouse at the edge of the island. I'm reluctant to say more about the plot, though having read the book I can state that even if you know the twist, it's still pretty effective the way Scorsese handles it. The film ends on a more ambiguous note than the book, making Teddy less passive and leaving you to wonder a bit more about his mental state. Much of the film depends on being able to successfully articulate the mental fragility of its protagonist. Teddy is a deeply troubled character, and from the first moments we're given a sense of just how on edge he is. Teddy's memories/nightmares/hallucinations about his late wife, Michelle Williams, play a prominent role in the story, growing more intense the further along the narrative gets. At first these scenes and the story's current-day scenes are separate and apart, distinct from each other, but as things progress Teddy's inner life begins to intrude more and more on his current reality until it comes to the point where he's talking to his wife and one of the patients/prisoners at the same time. The mixture of tones and color palettes, the Shutter Island scenes tend to be very dark, shadowy, grim-looking, the memories/hallucinations tend to be brighter and more colorful, gives the film an appropriately unbalanced feel that forces you to question everything. We never know for certain how much of what we're seeing is real and how much is part of an elaborate game of the mind. Scorsese shoots the film in a very intimate way, using sets that seem narrow and closed in to create a feeling of claustrophobia that unsettles us and aligns us more firmly with Teddy. As Teddy, DiCaprio renders a good performance that begins with barely repressed anger and fear that slowly starts to bubble to the surface until finally exploding in the film's final act. He manages to skirt the line, letting you see just enough beneath the surface that the turnaround at the end doesn't come as a complete shock, without tipping his hand and making it really obvious. A lot of skill went into making this film both in front of and behind the camera, and yet, for all that, Shutter Island ultimately left me a bit cold. I found it engrossing as I was watching it, but it didn't leave a very lasting impression on me. It's a good movie, but not a great one. This film, directed by Martin Scorsese. Screenplay by Leonardo DiCaprio. Based on Shutter Island. Produced by Mike Medavoy. Starring Leonardo DiCaprio. Cinematography Robert Richardson. Edited by Thelma Schoonmaker. Production companies Paramount Pictures. Distributed by Paramount Pictures. Release dates February 13, 2010. Running time 138 minutes. Country United States. Language English. Budget $80 million. Box office $294.8 million.